Hello. Today we are looking at the idea of performance as an ethical value. That is something that, as we've been saying, which each of these values, something that has some kind of intrinsic worth. So we have this image here we will start with, which is a man asleep at the wheel of a Tesla in California. And the Tesla is, of course, driving itself. Of course, here there's a kind of value for the person in the sense that he's getting a nap, and I think we can all agree that naps are very good. So the AI is working well to the extent to which he's able to get some sleep. I mean, you could actually measure it that way, right? You could say, look, how do we determine exactly in what kind of units can we measure how well the Tesla autopilot functions? Well, you could measure it in terms of hours of sleep that are gained. How many hours of sleep does it allow? The more hours it allows, the better it works. But that's not exactly the kind of performance that we want to talk about here. We want to narrow in a little bit more directly on the artificial intelligence itself. So we remember that we've talked about the values and the ethics of me, or of you, of the individual, dignity, privacy, and autonomy. We've talked about the ethics of us, the fairness, equity, social well-being. We've talked about the ethics of the machine in terms of explainability and in terms of safety. And now the last way that we're going to focus on and look at the machine or the AI is in terms of its performance. So if you look at this picture of this happily sleeping man, on the one hand, I want to say certainly for the driver, the AI is performing very well. It's doing exactly what he wants it to do. It's letting him sleep. But for Tesla and for the artificial intelligence, I'm not sure that the AI is performing well for this reason. When you drive a Tesla on autopilot, there are sensors in the wheel that determine, or are supposed to determine, whether or not the driver is actually holding onto the wheel and sort of attentive to the road. The reason for that is because the car is not really fully capable to drive on itself, even though this guy apparently has quite a bit of confidence in the car. The way the Tesla designed the AI is to move in two directions. In one, and of course this is the most important direction, the artificial intelligence driving the car is supposed to be autonomous. When it succeeds, the car drives perfectly from the office to home without any human intervention. However, another part of the AI that Tesla is employing in this vehicle is this sensor of the human, and the ability the car is supposed to have to determine whether or not the human is attentive to the road. Now, as it happens, if you look into this, you'll find that there are all kinds of tricks that humans play on the Tesla. That is, you can buy little handles that sit on the steering wheel and that trick the Tesla into thinking that the human is actually holding onto the wheel, when in fact the human is not doing that. So there's kind of a cat and mouse game. It's sort of strange that the actual purchasers of the Tesla and the users of the Tesla seem to have more confidence in the autopilot of the Tesla than the Tesla company itself, the company that makes it. In any case, when we talk about performance here, we can see at least three different ways of thinking about performance. We can think about how well the car is working for the driver. We can think about how well the car is doing its primary task, which is autopilot driving. And in those two ways, it's doing very well. But in this third way, in terms of the full scope of the AI, which also includes its ability to probe whether or not the driver is attentive, well, in that way, it's failing. Right? So we can begin to look at the idea of performance, of how well the machine is working. We can begin to look at that, in a sense, multidimensionally. It's not just a yes or no thing. It's not just that it's working well or it's not. Usually when you look at, or frequently when you look at AI technology, what you find is that in some ways it's functioning well, but in other ways perhaps it's not. And there's usually some analysis that's required to produce a some sense of a conclusion about how well the machine is working. So this is one example of that. You can see how you need to look at it from the driver, from the autopilot, and from the AI in its entirety. Now here is another example. We have seen this one. And I think this is an interesting example because, as we indicated in the past, I mean, here, in one sense, it seems as though, and then I guess I should rewind quickly, we remember that this is the case where some very clever computer programmer engineer engineered an artificial intelligence to make paper clips, but this engineer performed his or her task of coding too well instead of not well enough. And the result is that the machine just relentlessly made paper clips. And of course, this is just an apocryphal story. It's a toy example, but it's fun and interesting. But it's this idea that the machine performs so perfectly its duty to make paper clips that it ends up converting the entire world into a giant paperclip manufacturing process and exterminates humans and destroys the environment in the meantime. So here again, there's a kind of curious question about artificial intelligence performance. On the one side, it's certainly true that the original designer, or at least presumably in this kind of thought experiment, presumably the original designer did not plan or did not want or did not intend for the artificial intelligence to destroy the world and convert everything into paperclips. Presumably that was not the idea. The idea is just that it would make paperclips well. So in that sense, right, the performance of the machine is poor, right? The machine that was supposed to make paperclips and make people happy ends up destroying the world. But on the other hand, when you focus very tightly on the artificial intelligence, on what the machine is doing, in that case, it does seem like the machine is actually performing extremely well, right? The machine is doing what it was supposed to do impeccably. It's doing it so well that it's doing it even better than the human programmer could have imagined. Right? It's even better than the best case in a certain sense. So here too, we have this sort of bifurcation of performance. On the one hand, the human designer would certainly say, no, this is not a good performance. This is not what I wanted. It's true. But on the other hand, it's hard to deny that the machine is doing extremely well. And then maybe in terms of ethics, you might say, look, what's really going on here is not so much a debate about performance, but it's a debate between performance and, let's say, the value of social well-being. So in essence, you could say that what the computer programmer did, who made this crazy machine, is the kind of fundamental error that led to this dystopian outcome is that in a sense, you could say that the programmer coded for the ethics of performance, valued performance very highly, but valued social welfare far too, placed it far too low on the scale of relative importance. And the result of that was that the machine does very well in terms of the ethics of performance, but does quite poorly in terms of the ethics of social well-being. And the result is the whole earth converted into a paperclip manufacturing company. So you can see here that there's multiple ways of thinking about the ethics of performance. On the one side, you could say that there's a split in what we consider performance between the programmer's idea of performance and the pure mechanical version of performance. Or seen in a different way, you could see the actual split is between the idea of mechanical performance and social well-being. In either case, what we're left with is a strange situation where the machine is working extremely well, but so well that it's causing a disastrous outcome. So those are two examples to get us going on what performance is and how it works. And I want to use those to stress, most importantly, the idea that when we look at the performance of the machine, what we are really trying to evaluate, and this is going to be difficult, but what we are really trying to evaluate is performance strictly as it applies to the machine. So we're thinking about performance as an intrinsic value, as opposed to the other option would be to think about performance as a kind of a mediated value. And we've talked about this previously when we talked about privacy. There is this debate in the area of privacy about whether privacy exists as something that we want in and of itself, as an intrinsic value, or do we want privacy mainly for other reasons? Principally, people say, look, we want one significant reason people say that we want privacy is for our own autonomy, that is to maintain self-determination, so we're not manipulated by people who know too much about our interests and aspirations and fears and so on. If someone has that full set of information about the kinds of things that drive us psychologically and otherwise, it's very easy for someone, especially with the powers of artificial intelligence, to manipulate us. So you can make the argument that, look, privacy in and of itself is not worth very much, but it's worth quite a bit because it's necessary to have in order to have autonomy or self-determination. And that personal freedom, that's worth quite a bit. So that's the idea of a mediated value, something that has value because it lets you do something else. Whereas by contrast, and this is the argument that we tried to make the argument that the privacy also has a value in and of itself. And then something similar can be said here with respect to performance, right? It would be easy to say, look, the reason why we want the machine to perform well is because we want the outcome. So for example, if you use a machine to determine who should get or who should not get loans from a bank, mortgage loans, let's just say, you might say, look, we want the machine to do well. We want it to perform well because we want to make sure that everyone who can pay off the loan actually gets the loan. And ideally, the people who cannot repay the loans, they do not get a loan. And that would be perfect. And it seems like that would maximize social well-being, right? Because the people who can afford the loan all get the loan, so they're happy. The people who cannot afford the loan do not get the loan, so they're unhappy at the start, but at least they are spared the greater depression of getting the loan and then falling into bankruptcy. So you could say there, look, the performance of the AI in terms of the financial markets and its ability to discern who should and who should not receive a loan, that performance is quite important, but mainly because it serves social well-being. And by contrast, what we want to say is, no, we want to think about performance in and of itself as valuable and as worth having. And then usually what I do when, as you've seen when I'm doing this, is usually we go live to ChatGPT and see what ChatGPT says. But before this session, I checked, and what it said, I suspect it would say this again if we went and asked. But it was so perfect for what I wanted to say that I just copy-pasted what ChatGPT said, and we'll just put it here instead of going to actually do it. And you can see that what ChatGPT says, it says, measuring the ethical value of the performance of an AI tool involves evaluating, and then they talk about other stuff, fairness, transparency, accountability, which is explainability, privacy, and security. So you can see that what ChatGPT does is it does not describe performance as an ethical value, or at least as an intrinsic ethical value, as something that it's worth having on its own. Right? And what we have been trying to say throughout this entire seminar is that the reason we have these values, like self-determination and fairness and so on, is because they are worth having on their own. They are valuable intrinsically. And what we're really trying to zero in on, define, grapple with, understand, both intellectually and sort of in our bodies and our experiences too, but we're really trying to define is what these values mean in and of themselves. And the case of performance is going to be difficult because on the one hand, everyone understands what performance means. The machine works well. But as I've tried to show in the earlier examples, when you actually look at a specific case, it can be difficult to determine exactly what it is we should measure or see or sense when we think about the performance. And you can see that problem here clearly with ChatGPT. ChatGPT does not know how to think about performance as an ethical value. Instead, it immediately goes to other values and says, look, performance can help us get fairness. Performance can help us get privacy. And we will see later, we'll talk about that. And there's more to say about that, but at this initial stage, it's very important to see that ChatGPT is failing desperately. It's not showing us why performance is valuable in and of itself. It's instead saying we want performance to get something else. So what I really want to focus on here with performance, and what is difficult in my experience with understanding performance as a human value, is difficult to determine in all the different ways we think about the machine doing well, exactly what part of that is the part that measures the ethical value of performance of the AI. That's what we're looking at. And so here I say some provisional things. We want to say that performance is how well the machine serves its purpose. Okay, great. And we want to say it's how well it serves that purpose, independent of what the purpose is. So this is sort of step one. And this will take us back to the paperclip manufacturer, right? As it turns out, the purpose of making paperclips is not a good purpose for humanity if it destroys the world and kills all humans. Definitely, it's not a good purpose for humanity. But nevertheless, the performance value is still there. So the value of performance is independent of the purpose. It's independent of what is being performed. So the machine may do good things, it may do bad things, it may help people, it may harm people, it may make paper clips, it may destroy the world. None of those things matter for performance if we're going to evaluate it strictly. Now, those other things matter. Again, we're not saying they don't matter. Those other things matter when we talk about self-determination and social well-being and that stuff. But for performance, they don't matter. They are outside the scope of what's considered. We are only interested in how well the AI pursues its purpose, regardless of what that purpose is. And then sort of a corollary of that, at least in some pure sense, we don't care about how the degree to which the performance may cost on other ethical fronts. It may end up harming our privacy. It may end up destroying social well-being. Well, none of that matters, again, for performance if we consider it narrowly and as a value in and of itself. Then, of course, again, I want to be careful here. What we do when we do ethics is after we understand what performance is, then we step back and we say, well, in some cases, we want performance more than privacy or more than social well-being. But in other cases, like the paperclips, we probably want the social well-being more than the performance. So we can still say that we don't want the AI crazy paperclip machine. But it's just important to note that we make the case against the paperclip machine, not because it performs poorly. It doesn't. It performs very well. Instead, we make the case, we say, even though it performs well, and even though it has that ethical value, and there's something redeeming about it, even while we acknowledge that, we would still not turn this machine on because the cost in terms of another value, social well-being, is too high. So it's a battle between two values, and which one in this comparison we want more. And I think most of us would agree that in this case, we prefer to have social well-being than paperclips. I mean, what do you want more? Do you want people to be happy and flourish in the world, or do you want a lot of paperclips? I don't think that one's too difficult, right? But none of that takes away from the performance value of the machine that's making these paperclips. It does that very well. So then we can add to that a little bit. The AI dependably operates in accordance with its aims, even when confronted with unexpected changes, anomalies, and perturbations. One language that exists for that within the the community of designers is that the AI is robust and resilient, which means that it keeps going even in the face of unexpected changes or things, information that was not part of its training data or perturbations are slight changes in the way data is input, which sometimes can be structured. These little changes can be structured in a way to create large confusions. And we talked about that in the safety adversarial patches and things that confuse the camera in the AI driverless car. So part of what performance means is the ability to push through those kinds of problems. And then in the paperclip example, where the paperclip machine destroys the world, presumably what would have happened at some point, intermediate point, the people would have said, wait a minute, we have plenty of paperclips, and now the machine is starting to destroy the world. Maybe we should turn this machine off. Well, I mean, the machine would say at that point, or the programming of the machine would function to say, well, since I need to make paperclips, I better not let anyone turn me off. So since these humans want to turn me off, I better devise some kind of I better shoot paperclips at the humans until they go away or something. Who knows what? But the point is, presumably, in the paperclip example, at some point, humans would try to stop the machine. Well, that's an unexpected change. That's an anomaly. That's a kind of perturbation. Surely it's true that when the initial paperclip maker, the coder, the engineer who made the software determining that the AI would produce paperclips, presumably that person was not thinking at some point this machine will go crazy and humans will attack it. So I better put a subroutine in here to tell the machine how to resist the humans. No, and presumably the machine was just coded to make paperclips. That's it. So the fact that humans would be coming and attacking the machine, well, that's an anomaly. That's an unexpected change. That's something outside the original training data. And a machine that performs well will respond to that kind of new environment, that kind of new context, that kind of new information, or that kind of new input, which is unfamiliar to the machine in terms of its original training data. In other words, in a certain sense, right, the machine is robust and resilient. It doesn't matter what you throw at it. It keeps functioning in accordance with its highest imperative according to the original AI function. Right? So this idea of robust and resilience as part of performance is important because it indicates that the machine keeps going toward its focus or its goal, even when confronted with adversarial information or with kinds of inputs which are unfamiliar. Okay, and then so performance all good up to here, and then the last point is one question that is being begged through all of this is, okay, we're saying that the machine has this goal, this aim, this purpose. It's supposed to serve that purpose. And in the case of the paperclip machine, it's really easy to see what that purpose is. The purpose was just to make paperclips. Everyone agrees that's the way the thought experiment was constructed. But you can also ask, though, you could say, look, I mean, surely the designer who made this paperclip machine, surely they did not intend for the machine to go completely off the rails like this. So if you gave that original designer a chance to explain their machine, right, they might say, look, the way I coded it was to make paperclips, not to destroy the planet. Right? They would probably say that. But the code itself says make paperclips and doesn't say anything about the planet, so it destroys the planet. If you have those two ways of thinking about it, what was in the head of the engineer, which is make paperclips, but of course don't destroy the planet, and what is in the machine, which is make paperclips, well, which of those two is the purpose? Is the purpose the intention of the AI engineer, the human who made the machine, or is the purpose what exists in the machine itself? And what we're trying to say here is, if we're going to talk about the ethics of performance as an intrinsic value, then we have to get as narrowly as we can into the machine and say, look, regardless of what the original engineer may have thought that he or she was putting into the machine, regardless of what he or she may have imagined was going to be the outcome of this machine, what happened What existed in the world is the machine had this certain program which caused it to make paper clips. That's its purpose. That's what it was supposed to do. And when it comes to performance, it did that extraordinarily well. So I think in terms of performance, it just seems to me that the way we are thinking about it as an intrinsic value, you would have to say that when we try to define what the purpose of the machine is, then we would want to look at what the machine or the coding of the machine itself wants, as opposed to what the designer intended for it to want. I think that those are two different things. What the designer intended for the machine to want and what the machine wants, that difference can be determined by asking what the designer thought and looking at the code of the machine. But then again, okay, and here's the last point. It's not like machines don't think like humans. It's not like what the designer wrote into the machine is make paper clips, return, go, return, and walked away. No, the designer had to do all kinds of indirect things, right? Which had to do with it didn't really say make paper clips, presumably. The designer would have said pour metal into this shape and wait a certain amount of time until it's cold and then do it again or something like that. So when you actually look at the purpose in the machine and in the code, right, these are algorithms. And at the end, the algorithms just say if X, then Y, else Z, or whatever it is. There isn't any clear, or typically there will not be a clear purpose just directly stated. So you have to, in some sense, abstract the purpose from all of these sort of if-thens or if-else statements and that kind of thing. So it's not even here, even if we say we're going to locate the purpose only in the machine, it's not that easy, right? Because the purpose itself is never said in human terms in the machine. Instead, there is simple code saying do this, do the other thing, and then calculations of probabilities and so on. And so somewhere from all there, we need to either extract a purpose, and that's what we're doing in the paperclip case, right? We're saying, look, I'm extracting from all this code what seems to me to be the actual purpose. We could do that. Or alternatively, we could dive down into the code and say, look, every time it says X, do Z, else A or B or whatever it is, presumably we could dive down into the code and say, look, the code is working, right? The loops keep functioning. It doesn't get into a doom loop. The machine doesn't end up just repeating things pointlessly. The machine keeps functioning, doing something in a sense the way it should. The code keeps working as a functioning forward-aiming process, no matter what kind of data you throw at it. So that would be success or performance understood in terms of the pure code. So if we had more time, we could do a whole semester about this, talking about this difference between how performance of the paperclip machine is understood in human language and how it's understood in the language of computer programming. We have limited time, though, so we have to kind of leave that as a provocation and go on. And I think we can sort of wrap up what we've been saying here. What we have been saying here with just returning to these two examples quickly. You could say, look, the performance of the Tesla car, the autopilot driving is performing real well because the car is going on the road. For the driver is performing real well because he is able to take a nap. But we want to say that well-being the driver has, that's not really applicable. And then the final point was that the AI is failing because it's not sensing that the driver is inattentive. So our conclusion about the Tesla driverless car is, even though it looks superficially like it's performing really well, and it's certainly performing well in terms of the driving because it's not an accident, still the AI is not performing perfectly because it's failing to sense that the driver is not attentive. So it's curious that in this case, where the human well-being is served and it's good, we would still say that the AI is not performing supremely or perfectly well. Whereas by contrast, in the other case, with the superintelligence and the paperclips, there the outcome for humans is bad, but the performance is high. So what you have here is a kind of contrast where the outcome for humans is high, but the performance is medium for the Tesla. And here the outcome for humans is bad, terrible, but the performance is very high. So I think that kind of captures what we have been saying and the different ways that we've been trying to encapsulate this notion of performance as being something that is valuable in and of itself in the machine, not for humans and for other purposes. Okay, now all that said, this is the last point to make. It's the giant capital letter B-U-T. But of course, it can also be true. It can also be true that the machine could be calibrated or created to do something like protect user privacy, right? So we could easily imagine, and this happens all the time. We have all kinds of software innovations and AI developments like differential privacy, statistical developments, information technology developments like statistical privacy, which aim to protect user personal information. And that machine, we could imagine that machine could perform really well. It could, a machine dedicated, let's just say, a machine dedicated to taking health care personal information like age, gender, disabilities, illnesses, and so on, taking that healthcare information, extracting all the information that is useful for training AI healthcare devices like predictive analytics to know when someone might have a heart attack or when someone might have lung cancer or something. That kind of machine we could imagine an AI that successfully extracts all that information and allows further advances in AI healthcare, but at the same time, the machine also protects the identity, the original identity of that information, and so protects user privacy. That is, we can extract, and we can just imagine this, that we extract from the data all the information that helps us solve health problems, but we do not extract from that data how it connects with one or another person. Now, it's really difficult to do this. In fact, it's probably impossible to do it perfectly, but we could certainly develop AI machines that would try to do that, and then we could grade their performance in terms of how well they do that, how well they extract information which is useful for scientists while also protecting the identity of the people from whom that information was harvested. And that would be a performance score. It's just important to remember that if a machine did that really well, we would say that it performed well, and therefore it's worth having because of that performance, and not because it allows social well-being in terms of all the data that was harvested and is useful for further applications, and not because it supported user privacy by hiding the origin, or the connections between the data and the original patients. Right? So again, here, we can certainly say that an artificial intelligence can perform well and serve other ethical values, like privacy, like social well-being. It's just important to understand that the value of performance of the machine is not about the privacy or the social well-being. It's about the performance itself. So that's what we're trying to emphasize. I think that is, so when I say here, what is performance? It's how well the machine serves its purpose. And what we have been trying to say is we want to focus on what that purpose is and say that purpose is in the machine. So I think that's a good start. And that's the core of what I wanted to say about performance, because in my experience, frequently when I talk about performance as a value, people just naturally slip into thinking, oh, well, the machine is performing well because it's giving me the movies that I want on Netflix, or it's producing good healthcare insights. I mean, those are good things. We want those things, but those are not the ethics of performance. The ethics of performance is how well it does the task, not whether or not we like the results of that task. That's why the paperclip machine performs well, even though we don't like the results of the machine's activities. Okay, so that's what performance is. It's this intrinsic value. Now, there's just a couple more quick questions I want to do about performance. And the next one is we want to get at least some sense of, well, okay, if performance is this intrinsic value, what does that feel like? What is that about? How can I conceive what is this intrinsic value? Like I know what the value of a cup of coffee is when I've been speaking for a while and my throat begins to get a little bit dry. The coffee is very valuable. It helps out. Now I can speak more clearly. I feel like my mouth is more flexible and so on. So I know the value of coffee in that case. But if we want to talk about performance in and of itself, well, what is the value of that? And I think that there are three ways to imagine that this value of performance exists. And they all, I think, have some comparison with great art, like the Mona Lisa, which you can see underneath the slide here. So one idea of the intrinsic value of performance, and again, this is also true in what we consider to be great art, is the idea that there is some kind of imperceptible excellence in the work. So when you look at a great piece of art, you say, look, there's something which is beautiful here and perfect, but it's not the woman itself that's beautiful and perfect. There's instead some kind of capturing of humanity, which we see exists in this painting, but it's not about her specifically, and it's not about the artist specifically. It doesn't have anything to do with a woman named Lisa, who happened to be in Italy, right? And who was very Mona, right? Who was very adorable or cute, whatever Mona, however you translate Mona. So it's not exactly that notion of Lisa that is beautiful or perfect. Rather, it's this idea that there's something about her that is captured in the art. And we can't say what that is or define it exactly or even show it. It's just there. It might exist kind of as this question people ask, well, what is she smiling about? There's this kind of question that the art asks. And maybe it's the fact that it asks this question. It's not the fact that her mouth is painted perfectly. It's the fact that it evokes this question. Maybe that's part of the excellence of the painting. And maybe there's something like that in the performance of an AI too. There's something that's not in the results you actually see, but it's something imperceptible. There's kind of an ideal excellence in the machine, which can't be drawn or put exactly into words. Rather, it's something that provokes experiences in the world, or that kind of does something in the world. It's like the difference between a noun and a verb. You can see the nouns. Like you can see me in a cup, and you can see the liquid going into my mouth, but then there's the verb of drinking. Like you don't really see the verb, the action. You see the person who is drinking and the liquid disappearing, but you don't actually see the action itself. So there is this plane of reality that exists, which you can't see or touch or smell, but it exists. And maybe performance, both for a painter and for an AI, the value of performance exists somewhere on that plane. Maybe it's there in that reality. Of course, there are many people who say that everything I've just said is just sort of hot air, right? No, it doesn't really exist, this idea. It sounds good, this idea of idealistic perfection and some artistic value in some other realm. It sounds good. I mean, everyone agrees about that. But some people will say, but look, the truth is, no, not really. That doesn't exist. That's just someone saying nice words, but there's no truth to it. And maybe that's right. I don't know. I'm just trying to give the various possibilities for where the value of art would be. Another possibility would be, instead of invisible excellence or transcendence, it would be visible excellence, something you see here. And in the picture of Mona Lisa, I mean, of course, there's some visible excellence when you look at the way the mouth is painted and the eyes. She almost seems real. I mean, if you go to see the Mona Lisa, well, it's hard to get close to her because you have like 17 feet of space and then cords blocking you off and stuff. But you can imagine, right? And if you could get close to the Mona Lisa, and then there's this thick glass on it and everything. But if you could get close, I mean, there really is an excellence in that she seems very real. And her mouth, it really does capture this idea of the mysterious smile is really there. And it's astonishing to think that paint and canvas can be put together to create this impression of humanity, which is so strong and real. And that's very visible. You can just say, look, this person really painted, the artist painted the lips perfectly. And it's much better than, Michelangelo is much better than Brusseau, right? Brusseau could not do that. So if you put the Mona Lisa next to a James Brusseau, adorable Jean, making this up, right? You put those two together, it would be immediately clear that mine was ridiculous and dumb, and the Michelangelo is beautiful and perfect, right? So there's this just visible excellence that the guy has great skill. That's performance, and that, of course, it's quite clear that it may turn out. I'm just inventing this, but it may turn out that that this Lisa was a terrible person in real life. Maybe she was killing people. She was really an axe murderer and killing people. So maybe she was a terrible person and not at all the kind of person you want to be with or converse with or have dinner with or anything. Just a terrible human being. But that doesn't change the fact that the art is excellent, right? The art is still excellent no matter how bad Mona might turn out to be in real life. And then we want to say similarly with the value of art in AI, right? It doesn't matter that the paperclip machine destroys everything. It's still a very beautiful machine in terms of its performance. Right? This is a very beautiful painting, even if Lisa herself is a terribly ugly woman. I don't know if she is or isn't. I'm just making that up. But whether she is or is not doesn't matter. Right? We would still agree the painting is beautiful. It has performance on the part of the painter. And then, so that's a second idea. There's first the idea that there's some kind of, that performance is some kind of transcendent value. We can't really say it or write it or explain it, but it's somehow there. The second idea is, no, it's not that. It's really there. You can look at it, you can touch it, you can see it. It's how perfect the lips are. It's a visible excellence possible. The problem with that is, here, as I quickly note, if we want to say that performance exists purely in and of itself, so you have the question, well, can the performance be abstracted from what is performed upon? I mean, can you take away the idea of the perfect painting of Lisa from the actual woman? Can you pull those two things apart? If this was a philosophy class, we could talk about that more. But let's just say here that that's actually a real question. Similarly, with the paperclip thing, you would ask, well, can we really take apart the fact that the machine makes paperclips wonderfully and the fact that it destroys the world? Are those two things separable? Maybe not. We would have to think about that some more. People who doubt that, that's why they go for the transcendent, the pure idealism thing. And then a third way of thinking about kind of the value of performance is you could say, well, there's kind of a feeling of accomplishment, right? It's not so much that the painting is perfect, but it's the feeling the artist has when he, in this case, it's Michelangelo, when he feels like he has practiced painting a lot. Maybe he did a lot of preparations for this particular portrait, and then he does it well. And so there's a feeling of accomplishment. And of course, we're all familiar with this. We all have things that we work at. And in my case, very rarely do I succeed, but once in a while, right? So let's say, I might play golf year after year after year after year. And finally, after many, many years, I finally get a hole-in-one or something. We would say, okay, well, there you go. There's a feeling of accomplishment there. Of course, it's a great performance on that one hole, not in any others. But at least in that one case, there's this moment, this sensation of accomplishment, which is a little bit different than the feeling of the perfection of the shot, if it's a hole-in-one. But the feeling of the accomplishment is the sense that, well, I've done all this work and it has culminated, it has reached a kind of perfection as a part of a process. So that's a little different kind of excellence. That's a little different sensation for how performance would have intrinsic value, right? A sense of self-accomplishment, a sense of conquering myself, and a sense of practicing and leading to a goal and achieving that goal. It's like climbing a mountain, kind of, right? You don't go to the top of the mountain to see what it's like up there. You can get a helicopter for that. You go up to the top of the mountain as a way of challenging yourself and then achieving that, right? So I think that kind of excellence or that kind of satisfaction is different than the satisfaction of the perfect painting of the lips, right? Because we can imagine someone just born with natural talent who just paints perfectly, but never has to try. So that person would have a kind of sensation of excellence, like, oh, this is a great painting, great. But they would never have that sensation of accomplishment, of having working to achieve a goal. So those are two different things. The person who just has this natural talent, and maybe it's good for that person that they don't have to work toward the goal. I don't know. I'm just saying that there is two different things. Like doing something really well naturally gives you that excellence of execution, but it does not give you that other excellence, which is the excellence of accomplishment, which comes from practice, and finally doing it. So those are distinct senses of kind of accomplishment, or of, let's say value that exists when you imagine that we are a painter and we learn to paint, or we learn to golf, or when we try to imagine a machine's functioning. Right? There could be an AI functions, its performance is in some sense beautiful, or its high performance in some sense we can't see, in some ideal sense. Or maybe it's high performance more in what we can see, like the paper clips flying out. Or more it's high performance in the sense that it learns, like there are some machine learning programs that maybe they fail at the start, but little by little they get better and better and better until they become nearly perfect. So those are three different ways of beginning to think about what the sensation of performance is, what it feels like when you perform. There's a lot more to say on this, but we have limited time, so I think I will leave it there. Just at the point, I just trying to say that the question about what the human experience of performance is and how that translates into a machine and what it means to say that a machine performs well, there's a lot to think about there. There's a lot of discussion. And maybe someone could say, look, performance is not really a value. Machines don't have that kind of stuff. Might be. That would also be worth thinking about. But what we're trying to do here, remember what we're trying to do in this seminar is we're trying to give the broadest reach possible of the central values. And it could be that we think about machines as performing well or poorly. And that strong performance as an intrinsic value, as something that's worth having in itself, in and of itself, regardless of what it's performing at, regardless of what it's doing. Okay, so that's the idea, really wanting to stress this notion of intrinsic value in performance. And then the last, this is the very last thing to conclude quickly. We have talked quite a bit about how AI ethics fuels innovation. And it seems to me that this is quite important. Frequently, people think of ethics as being against innovation, or as something that puts constraints on innovation, or as something that limits innovation, or halts innovation and drives innovation backward. In any case, there's a kind of obstacle to artificial intelligence advancing. And then what we have been saying throughout the entire set of sessions is that, well, when you look more carefully, that's not true. There are all kinds of ways that ethics actually helps innovation, that drives innovation forward. And so we talked about the case that one thing that ethics does is it gives metrics that allows us to determine what counts as success. What means, how do we know the machine is doing well? And the case that we used there was this case going back to the start of Cardicio and the heart machine and autonomy. And we said, look, that pure accuracy is not a good measure in that case of AI success. AI success occurs when human beings, live better lives because of this artificial intelligence healthcare tool, right? So because we were able to determine or to change the way the designers thought about what counts as success for the tool was able to have more success in the world. And of course, that feeds innovation, right? I mean, if AI never does anything good for anyone, then it's not going to go very far. Right? We're not going to have a lot of innovation in something that no one wants. For there to be innovation, people need to want it. And ethics helps us figure out how and why we want this machine to work. And as I say, the Cardicio case is a perfect example of that. Another reason why ethics serves innovation is that it solves innovation problems. We've said that it's very true. No one denies the fact that the advance of artificial intelligence is causing humanist problems left and right. I mean, we've been talking today about the question of privacy, right? It's true that artificial intelligence applied to healthcare is providing great diagnoses and solutions. But to do that, it needs a lot of personal information. And a lot of companies are kind of being a little bit fast and loose about how they're getting that information. And they're harming an individual's privacy. So what we wanted to say here is that, well, that doesn't necessarily mean we need to stop innovation, though some people say that. What we could also say is instead of slowing down, we need to speed up. We need to find ways to harvest this data so that we get the benefits, but we also keep the privacy. And we also break the link between the data and the individual patients. And so that in that way, too, ethics can drive innovation. They can give us a problem that we need to solve. And then thirdly, ethics delineates scenes of possible social rejection. We haven't talked about that very much, but that's obvious. Again, if no one likes what AI is doing, there's not going to be a lot of AI innovation. So ethics kind of gives us a heads up about what we should avoid. 4 irresolvable dilemmas are illuminated so they can be navigated. And we've talked a lot about this too, about how it seems like, at least right now, that there is this intrinsic divergence or let's say tension or dilemma. It's not quite a zero-sum game, but there are elements of that in the case of privacy and healthcare advances. If we want to really use AI to make healthcare work a lot better, we're probably going to have to take away, extract users' personal information. We saw that during COVID, right? We said, look, we want to use artificial intelligence to trace where people are so we can trace how the disease sickness spreads so we can save lives. That makes a lot of sense. Of course we want to do that. But in order to do that, in order to find out how the disease spreads from one person to another, we need to know where everyone is all the time. And so in New Zealand, they made these tracer apps, which were giant violations of privacy. Now, it makes sense. I'm not saying that was a wrong thing to do. But obviously, right, there are these dilemmas that come up. And what ethics helps us to do is, instead of just throwing our hands up in the air and saying, oh, maybe we should just forget all this stuff, it says, look, there's some social well-being we get, there's some privacy we get, we understand this problem, and we can navigate through it now because we understand it. Right? So ethics allows innovation because it allows us to at least understand the problem problems that are arising alongside our work. And then maybe, again, we could use AI to solve those problems. And then finally, we'll conclude with this. If it's true that performance is intrinsically good, I mean, if there's kind of a value in a machine that functions perfectly, even if that machine destroys the world making paperclips, if that value exists, if it's worth having performance in itself, well, then ethics is purely driving innovation there, right? And that's pure innovation. That's pure performance is pure innovation. It's making the AI work always better, always faster, always advancing, always doing more, right? Doing more with less data and less energy, better outcomes, and so on. So this is innovation, right? I mean, in a sense, performance is almost, it's not quite, but it's almost a synonym for innovation. When you have performance, you're going to get innovation, and innovation is going to raise performance. So as long as you're saying that performance itself has value, that performance itself is worth having, then that means innovation is going to be worth having too, because that's where performance lives. That's where it exists. Innovation causes performance, betters performance, and performance allows for more innovation further down the line. So there's a link between innovation and performance. And if you want to say that we want to go pedal to the metal on all this AI stuff, go as fast forward, advance as fast as we can, then one value that you might want to put near the top of your stack of considerations is the value of performance. Say, look, it's just intrinsically good that we have machines that work well. Just like it's intrinsically good that we have great painted art. Just like it's intrinsically good that we have great novels. And there are things that are just worth having on their own, and performance is one of those things. What I've tried to show you in this session is how you can make that case. And if you do make that case, then that is going to favor innovation in artificial intelligence. All right, so that's what we talked about today, the ethics of performance. We gave some examples which showed how it can be very difficult to discern exactly what counts as performance in the machine. And then we tried to say in the second part that performance, as we're understanding it here, is intrinsic and limited exactly to how the machine works. And then we showed how that can lead to AI innovation.